My name is Ilsa Wren, and for 19 years my whole duty in the Palace of Harrowgate was to write down what people said. Not what they did, not what they meant. The diary of the household, the daybook of the royal house of Harrowgate, kept unbroken since the reign of Alaric's great-grandfather, record speech and only speech. 2 ruled columns on heavy paper, spoken and answered. If a thing is said in a state room in the hearing of the clerk, it goes into the left column. If a person present replies, their reply goes into the right. And if they do not reply, the convention of my office is 4 words, written small, in the same brown ink my predecessors used. Made no reply. 4 words, harmless, a clerk's shrug. In 19 years, I had written them perhaps 10,000 times, and never once thought them cruel. I had grown so used to writing down silence that I had stopped hearing it. The first time I heard it, truly heard it, the way you hear a bone break, was on Founder's Eve in the Long Gallery at 11 minutes past 4 in the afternoon. While 30 members of the court practiced a procession, they had all walked 100 times before. The Long Gallery runs the whole north face of Harrowgate, 140 paces of polished oak, hung with the dead of the house in gilt frames, ending at the ivory door, which opens onto the mirror hall. At the ivory door stands a guardsman of the household foot, always. Red wool tunic, brass buttons in 2 files, black bearskin, white gloves, a rifle at his shoulder and his eyes on the far wall. He does not move. He does not speak. That afternoon the guardsman at the ivory door was Ivo Rennick, 3rd Company, and I knew his name only because it is my business to know every name in the rooms I write in. He was perhaps 30. He had a face like a shut gate. In 4 months of standing him at that post, I had never once seen his eyes flick. The procession was for Founder's Eve. The household walks the gallery, youngest to eldest, each carrying a lit taper to the mirror hall to set in the great candle frame. It takes 11 minutes. Children love it because for once they go first. Princess Malin was 9 years old, and she went first. She was small for 9. She had her mother's dark hair and her grandmother's rather serious eyebrows, and she carried a green cloth notebook everywhere she was allowed to, and several places she wasn't, because she was making, with enormous patience and no encouragement from anyone, a book of the birds of the fenwater. She could tell you the difference between a marsh harrier and a hen harrier at 400 paces. She had a small stammer, a catch that came on her before hard consonants, and she had very nearly beaten it. That spring she had read a whole grace aloud at table without a single stumble, and her father, the crown prince, had put down his knife and applauded, which mortified her, and which she told me about 3 separate times. Her father and mother were not in the palace that week. Crown Prince Rowan and Princess Alara were in the 4th day of the Northern Progress, 3 weeks of shipyards and grain halls and civic dinners in the shire towns, and when it was announced, the question of the children had come up at the household council, and the Queen Consort had settled it in 1 sentence. "They will stay with me," Morwenna had said. "They are my grandchildren in every way that matters." They were not, of course. Morwenna had married King Alaric 11 years after the death of Queen Isolde, and had brought with her a grown son, Lord Cassius, a grown daughter, Lady Verena, and an appetite that the palace had been slow to measure. But the sentence sounded warm, and the king had been tired, and so he said "yes, of course, thank you, my dear," and I wrote it down. Spoken, the Queen Consort proposed that the royal children remain in her care during the Northern Progress. Answered, His Majesty consented and thanked her. 9 words in my hand, and a child's whole autumn decided. So on Founder's Eve, Malin went first, because she was youngest, carrying an unlit taper and her green notebook jammed under her arm because she had refused to leave it in her rooms. And Lady Verena stopped her. Verena was 19, a tall, glossy, laughing girl who had learned very early that a room will forgive almost anything from someone who is amusing about it. She stepped out of the line of the older cousins and put 2 fingers on Malin's shoulder, light as a landing bird, and said, in a voice pitched exactly loud enough to carry to the whole gallery, "Not with that, mouse." Malin stopped. "The book," Verena said. "You can't carry a grubby little book in the founder's procession. It's 400 years old. It isn't a bird-watching party." She smiled around at the line behind her, gathering them the way she gathered every room. "Give it to me. I'll keep it safe." Malin's hand tightened on the green cover. "I can hold it," she said. "It won't be in the W-way." And Verena laughed. Not a cruel laugh, and I want to be exact, because exactness is my trade. It was a nice asterisk laugh. A friendly, sparkling, look-at-us laugh, and it invited everybody in. "It won't be in the W-way," she said, kindly, and 3 of the young cousins laughed, and Lord Piers Thane laughed, and Lady Corisande Vell put her hand over her mouth, and the sound of it went down that 140 paces of oak and came back off the ivory door. Malin's face went the color of the wall behind her. She did not cry, she did not run, and she did not shout. She stood in the middle of the long gallery under the portraits of her own dead with her taper in one hand and her book in the other, and she made herself very small and very still, and waited for it to be over, which is a thing no 9-year-old should ever have learned how to do, and she had learned it well. I was at my desk in the window bay. My pen was already moving. That is the horror of my profession. The pen moves before the heart does. "Spoken." Lady Verena requested that Her Highness Princess Malin surrender a notebook before the procession. And then I looked up, because the next thing in that column had to be an answer, and I needed to know who would give it. The Queen Consort was standing 8 paces away. She had come into the gallery by the painted stair, in grey silk, with her steward Aldous Fenn a half-step behind her. She had a clear view. She had heard every word, I know she had, because she had turned her head towards the sound before the laugh even finished, the way a woman turns when she hears her own daughter's voice. She looked at Verena. She looked at Malin, at the small rigid figure with the green book, at the hot, ashamed face. And Morwenna, Queen Consort of Eldermoor, wife of the king, mistress of that house, the one person standing in that gallery who could have ended the whole thing with 3 words, smiled very slightly and turned away, and asked Aldous Fenn something about the flowers. Nobody was struck. No hand was raised in the long gallery of Harrowgate on Founder's Eve. If you had walked in 10 seconds later, you would have seen a pleasant scene. A great house at rehearsal, a beautiful young woman being funny, a queen consort inspecting an arrangement of white roses. And I bent my head, and I wrote the 4 words. Answered, Her Majesty made no reply. I want to tell you that my hand shook. It did not. 19 years, the hand does what it is trained to do. But something else in that room did not. At the far end of the gallery, at the ivory door, the guardsman moved. It was nothing. Guardsman Rennick's chin came down perhaps the width of a fingernail. His eyes, which had been on the far wall for 3 hours, came down and forward and found the child. And stayed on her. That is all he did. He did not step or speak or lower the rifle. In every convention of my office, in the whole 400-year law of that room, nothing whatever had happened. But I had been watching men stand at that door for 19 years, and I had never seen one look. Verena took the notebook. She took it gently, the way you take something from a smaller creature, and tucked it under her own arm and said, There. Now you look like a princess, and gave Malin's shoulder a little pat and walked back into the line, and the whole gallery breathed out and resumed, because the awkwardness was over and everyone could be comfortable again. And Malin walked the procession. 11 minutes, taper high, chin up, first in the line as her rank required, past 40 adults who had all seen it, and all found it easier not to have. I watched her go past my desk. She was counting under her breath her own steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, the way she counted before hard consonants, The way her mother had taught her, if you slow down, the word comes. And she was using it now not to get out a word but to get down 140 paces of oak without breaking. At the ivory door, she had to pass within a foot of guardsman Rennick. She did not look at him. She had been taught, as all the children of that house are taught, that the guards are not to be spoken to, not to be waved at, that they are a kind of furniture that breathes. But as she passed him, her hand came up, a small, unconscious, hopeless little movement, half a wave, dying before it finished, and she went through the ivory door into the mirror hall and set her taper in the frame. The candle would not catch. Her taper had gone out somewhere in the middle of the gallery, and she stood in front of the great brass frame in front of all of them, holding a dead taper at 100 lit ones. And Lady Verena said, from the doorway, warmly, sweetly, so that everybody could enjoy it, "Oh, Mouse, you can't even manage fire." The laugh that time was bigger. I wrote it down. God forgive me, I wrote it down, and then I wrote the 4 words underneath, because Her Majesty was standing in the doorway with her hand resting on the frame, watching, and she said nothing at all. Made no reply. Let me tell you about the rules of the household foot, because everything that came after turns on them. The standing orders are printed in a gray book the size of a hand, and Article 9 is the whole soul of the regiment. Everyone in Eldermoor has it by heart now, which is a strange thought. Article 9. A guardsman on post is silent. He does not speak, nor answer, nor acknowledge, nor turn, save to the officer of his watch, or to give warning of fire or of arms, or of an intruder upon the ground he holds. His stillness is the honor of the house. He is the wall, and a wall does not argue. It has stood since the founding of the regiment. Guardsmen have been spat on under it, slapped, mocked, filmed, prodded, insulted in 4 languages by drunk men and rich men and men who thought they were being funny, and they have not moved, and the not moving is the point and the pride and the whole cold poetry of the thing. To speak on post is not a small breach. It is a charge before the table of conduct, and the punishment for a guardsman who breaks Article 9 is dismissal from the household foot, not suspension. Dismissal asterisk, the tunic taken back, the name struck from the company roll, no pension, no character, no return. Ivo Rennick had 11 years in. His father had 26 in the same company before him, and had died 3 years earlier with the regimental colors over him, and Ivo had carried the front left corner of that coffin himself. I tell you now so that you understand. When that man finally opened his mouth in the mirror hall, he was not being impulsive. He was setting fire to his entire life, on purpose, with his eyes open. For a 9-year-old girl he had never been permitted to say a single word to. The notebook was not returned. Malin asked for it, twice, in the correct way, through the proper channel, which in that autumn meant asking the Queen Consort's steward, because Morwenna had the wardship and Aldous Fenn had Morwenna's diary. The first time, Fenn said it would be looked for. The second time, he said that Lady Verena had put it somewhere quite safe, and that Her Highness was not to make a business of it. I heard both exchanges, because both happened in a state-room, and both went into the diary, and both times the right-hand column was the same 4 words, because Morwenna was there at her writing table, 4 feet away, and Morwenna said nothing. I began, that week, to notice the 4 words. Anyone can look at that column now. It hangs in a case in the Armory Hall with the page open at the 29th. But at the time I was the only person alive who had the whole of it in one head, and it read like this. Made no reply. Made no reply. Made no reply. Her Majesty made no reply. Her Majesty made no reply. 5, 6, 9, 11 times down a season, in my own careful brown hand. Every one of them attached to a moment when a grown woman with the power of the crown behind her stood close enough to touch a child and chose the flowers instead. And every Friday the fair copy of the diary went up to the Queen Consort's rooms in a red leather sleeve, and she read it, and she signed the bottom of the last sheet Morwenna R. Because when she married the king she had taken the counter-signature of the day-book away from the Lord Chamberlain, as a mark of her standing in the house. She signed her own silence, 11 times in her own hand. Nobody in Eldermoor noticed that, for 11 weeks including me. The cruelty did not stop, because cruelty of that kind never stops on its own. It feeds on the room's relief that nothing worse is happening. And I must be plain about what it was, because when the thing finally broke, half the realm said, well, girls tease, and that was the trap. Nobody laid a hand on Princess Malin. Not once. And if anyone had, it would have been over in a day, because there is not a servant in that building who would have stood for it, and Morwenna knew it. What Verena did was smaller than that and worse, and it took 9 weeks. She made a game of it. That was her genius. She called it the Lantern Court, a club of the young people of the household, meeting in the schoolroom court under the glass lantern, with rules Verena invented as she went. And Malin, being the youngest and the loneliest and the most desperately grateful to be included in anything, joined it, and was made its secretary, which sounded like an honor and meant that she was the one who had to fetch things. The rules of the Lantern Court. That any member might speak, save the secretary, who must ask leave first. That the secretary must ask leave aloud in a full sentence, and might not begin the sentence again if she stumbled. You see it. It took me 3 weeks to see it, and I am ashamed of every one of those weeks. That rule was built, deliberately, around a 9-year-old stammer. It was a machine for making a child fail in public, and it looked, from any distance at all, like a children's game with rules. And when Malin stumbled, and she stumbled because who would not, with 8 faces waiting and a rule that said begin again and you lose, nobody jeered. That would have been coarse. They waited, politely, with enormous elaborate patience. Verena would tilt her head and say, "Take your time, mouse," in the gentlest voice in the world, and the silence would stretch and Malin's face would go slowly red, and finally Verena would say, "Never mind. Khorasan, you tell us," and move on. She lost her place at the founder's table. Verena redrew the seating for the children's end, and Malin's card simply was not there. And it was a mistake. Of course it was. How funny. Sit here at the end by the door then. She lost the name her mother called her. Ilara called her me asterisk. By the 3rd week of October there was not a young person in that household who called her anything but mouse asterisk, and they said it fondly, and they said it laughing, and that is how a name is taken. She stopped bringing books to the schoolroom. She stopped reading grace at table, though it was her turn twice, and gave the turn away both times to Lord Piers, who took it and thanked her sweetly. She got quieter and quieter, and the household said what households always say, which is that Malin was going through a shy patch, and that it was hard on her, her parents being away, and wasn't Lady Verena good with her, always including her. I wrote it all down. Every word of it that was spoken in a state-room I wrote down. That was my duty, and I did it perfectly, and it is the worst thing I have ever done. The ivory door is a 2-hour post, but there is a rule in the 3rd company, an old one, not written anywhere, that a man may petition the sergeant for a asterisk standing post asterisk. The same door, the same hours, every day for a season if it suits the roster. It is a small privilege. Men ask for it to be near a window or out of a draft. In the 2nd week of October, Guardsman Ivo Rennick petitioned for a standing post at the ivory door, 4 to 6, every afternoon. 4 to 6 is when the Lantern Court met. The ivory door is the only door in and out of the schoolroom court. Nobody knew he had done that except the sergeant, who thought nothing of it, and Captain Bevan Marsh, who countersigned the roster without reading it, as captains do. So for 6 weeks, every afternoon, that man stood at that door with his eyes on the far wall, and his rifle on his shoulder, and heard, through 8 feet of oak, A 19-year-old woman teach a room full of young aristocrats how to break a 9-year-old for sport, in a voice like sugar. And every afternoon at 6 the door opened and Malin came out and went past him, and he did not move. He could not, Article 9. He is the wall, and a wall does not argue. I asked him months later what those 6 weeks were like. He is not a talkative man. He thought about it for a long time. You spend 11 years training yourself that whatever is happening in front of you is not your business, ma'am, he said at last. You get so good at it that you stop being able to tell the difference between the things that aren't your business and the things that are. And then one afternoon you're standing at a door and you hear a little girl practicing out loud on her own in the corridor before she goes in, practicing a sentence, just one. May I have leave to speak? Over and over, 20, 30 times, getting it right so that when she goes in there she can get it out clean and they won't. He stopped. And you find you've turned your head, he said, and you've no more idea why you turned it than a stone would. The first thing I ever heard Ivo Rennick say was not in the mirror hall. It came 10 days earlier, and it was 3 words, and it was the beginning of the end of everything. It was a Thursday, and the lantern court had gone badly, and Malin came out of the schoolroom court at 6:10 with her face set very hard, and instead of turning left towards the nursery stair she turned right, into the window bay of the long gallery, which is where my desk is, and which is 8 feet from the ivory door. She did not see me. I was behind the shutter filing. She sat down on the window seat with her back to the cold glass and pulled her knees up, and stayed there, not crying, breathing carefully. The way you breathe when crying is a thing you have decided against. And then she said, to the empty gallery, or to the window, or to the portrait of her great-grandmother on the opposite wall, "Am I allowed to be here?" Guardsman Rennick was 6 paces away, eyes forward, rifle at the shoulder. She had not addressed him. She would never have dreamed of addressing him. But there was nobody else in that gallery, and she was 9 years old, and she had asked a question out loud into a room that contained exactly one other living soul, and she waited, in the way a child waits. 4 seconds, 5. And Guardsman Rennick said, without turning his head, without moving his eyes from the far wall, in a low, flat voice that did not carry past the shutter, "Yes, Your Highness." 3 words. Not a speech, not an intervention. He did not kneel to her, or comfort her, or tell her she was worth 10 of Verena. He answered a question that had been asked of the air, because a child had asked it, and then he stood there and looked at the far wall, and his white glove on the stock of that rifle was shaking so badly I could see it from behind the shutter. Malin's head came up. She looked at him for a long moment, at the wall of red wool and black fur that had answered her, and something came back into her face that had been gone for a month. Not joy, nothing so big. Just the ordinary sense a person has that they exist. "Thank you," she said, very politely, and got up and went to her supper. And I sat behind my shutter with a great, cold, dawning horror in my chest, because I had just watched a man break Article 9, the article that would cost him his tunic, his roll, his father's regiment, and his name, for the sake of saying yes to a 9-year-old. And in 11 weeks, he was the only person in the Palace of Harrowgate who had said anything at all. Including me. I did not write it down. It is the one thing in 19 years I left out of that book, and I left it out to protect him, and it did not protect him for very long. I tried, through the proper channels, in the proper way, and the proper channels are a machine for turning a wrong into a paper. I went first to Aldous Fenn, because he kept the consort's diary, and a word from him could have moved anything. I said that certain arrangements among the young people appeared to be causing Her Highness distress. I chose my words like a woman crossing a river on stones. Fenn heard me out with his head on one side, and then he said, "Has anyone struck her?" "No." "Has anyone shouted at her?" "No." "Has anyone denied her food, or her lessons, or her physician, or her mother's letters. No, I said. Her mother's letters go to her. She keeps them under her pillow. She reads them until they come apart at the folds. Then I confess I don't see the complaint, Mistress Wren. He smiled at me, not unkindly. He was a thoroughly decent man in every particular except the one that mattered, which is that he had decided long ago what kind of trouble was real. Children are unkind to one another. It is disagreeable and it is universal and it passes. Lady Verena has taken a great deal of trouble to include the child in her set, which, forgive me, is more than the child's own cousins have done. Would you rather she were left out entirely? That is the sentence I have never got over. Verena had built a cage and called it an invitation, and the whole house was grateful to her for the invitation. So I went higher. I asked for 10 minutes of the Queen Consort's time, and I got them, on a Friday, in her private closet, with the red leather sleeve on the table between us and the fair copy of the week's diary, inside it waiting for her signature. I did not accuse. I did not argue. I simply opened the sleeve and turned the sheets and laid my finger on the right-hand column and left it there. On made no reply and made no reply, and Her Majesty made no reply and said, "Ma'am, I find I am writing the same 4 words rather often this season. I wanted to be certain the record is as Your Majesty would wish it." Morwenna looked at my finger for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and she smiled, and I understood completely, and for the first time, that she had known exactly what was being done to that child from the first afternoon, and had watched it with her whole attention, and had allowed it to continue for reasons that had nothing to do with children at all. Malin was Rowan's daughter. Rowan was the heir. Ilara was beloved in the Shires in a way Morwenna had never once been. And a small, serious, stammering girl with a notebook of birds who could not get a sentence out in front of 8 people was useful to Morwenna, not as an enemy but as a story. The story that the heir's line was frail. The story that the child was odd, difficult, unfit for the room she would one day have to stand up in. Verena was not doing her mother's bidding. Verena was doing what Verena had always done, because it amused her, and because nobody had ever stopped her. Her mother simply saw where the water was running, and did not put out a hand to turn it. That is what complicity by silence is. It does not require a plan. It requires only that you find the wrong thing convenient and are patient. The record, Morwenna said pleasantly, should be as it is. The record is not a place for opinions, Mistress Wren. It is a place for facts. If I made no reply, then no reply was made, and it is your business to write it and nothing else. She picked up her pen and signed the sheet. Morwenna R. Firm, unhurried, the loop of the R sweeping wide. It is a rare and enviable office, yours. 19 years. So few clerks last. Do you know why? No, ma'am. They begin to interpret, she said, and a clerk who interprets is a clerk who is replaced. She handed me back the sleeve. Send in Fen, she said, and shut the door. I did one more thing. I wrote to Princess Ilara. I wrote plainly in my own name, and I said that her daughter was not well used in that house, and that she should come home. And I gave the letter to the progress bag, which goes north twice a week under seal, because that is the proper channel. The progress bag is packed in the Queen Consort's own outer office. It is carried by the Queen Consort's own courier. Aldous Fenn signs the manifest. My letter never arrived. Ilara has it today. It was found, unopened, in the drawer of a writing desk in Morwenna's closet, with 2 others, one from the children's physician and one from a housemaid named Bet Corliss who had seen the lantern court through a window and could not sleep for it. 3 women, 3 letters, 1 drawer. We none of us knew about the others. That is how it works. Everybody assumes they are the only one who noticed, and so everybody assumes they must be wrong. The Rose Ball is held in the Mirror Hall on the last night of October, and its final hour by tradition belongs to the young people of the household. There is a game, very old and quite silly, the recitation. A young person is called out into the middle of the floor and must recite something of their own, and the court applauds whatever it is, warmly, because the whole point is that the children are being watched fondly by 300 adults, and it does not matter if it is any good. I was at my desk on the dais, 3 feet from the king's chair, because the recitation goes into the diary. The hall was hot and gold and full of light. King Alaric was in his chair, half-turned, listening to the Lord Treasurer about the northern grain figures, one hand over his mouth. He looked old that autumn. Princess Adela, his sister, the only person alive who has ever routinely told him he was being a fool, was in the eastern shires and would not be back until the 4th. The Queen Consort was on the king's left, in dark red with her rings on. And Guardsman Ivo Rennick was at the ivory door, 4 paces behind my desk, where he had stood every evening of that season. Verena took the floor at 10:15. She had the whole hall the instant she stepped out, 300 people turning towards her, delighted, ready to be entertained, and she stood in the middle of that floor with the candle frame blazing behind her and said, "I shan't recite, I'm a dreadful reciter, but I have something far better," and she held up a small green cloth-bound book. I felt the floor of my stomach go out. "Our secretary," she said, "has been writing a book for a year. She is far too modest to read from it, and I think that's a shame, because it's a very great work of literature and the court should hear it." And she opened it, and she began to read. She read the bird notes first. A marsh harrier at the Fenwater, the 2nd of March, flying low with wings held in a V, which is how you know it from a hen harrier. She read it in a small, careful, breathless voice, a 9-year-old's voice, cruelly caught, with the little catch put in before the hard consonants, a Marsh harrier, and the hall laughed because she was so good at it, and because it is very funny when a beautiful young woman does a voice. I looked for Malin. She was at the children's end of the hall, standing quite still, with her hands at her sides. Verena turned to the back of the book. "But that's not the best of it," she said. "The best of it is the letters. She writes letters to her mama. She doesn't send them. She keeps them at the back. Listen." The king was not listening. He had his head bent to the treasurer. He heard the laughter and smiled vaguely at it, the way a tired man smiles at a sound he assumes is harmless. The Queen Consort was listening. She had put down her glass, and she was watching her daughter with her chin a little lifted, and she was smiling. And Verena read out, in that same small, breathless, borrowed voice, in front of 300 people. "Dear Mama, I am being very brave. I do not cry in front of them any more, not once since the 16th. Please do not tell Papa about the lantern court, because he will make a fuss and then they will say I am a tell-tale and then I will have nobody at all. I have decided I do not need to have friends this year. I am 9 and there is a lot of time. Please come home. Please come home. Please." 300 people were laughing. Not all of them. I want to be fair to that hall, not all of them. But enough that it was a sound, a great warm roaring sound of amusement rolling up to the gilt ceiling, and in the middle of it a 9-year-old girl stood at the children's end with her hands at her sides and her private heart being read out for sport, and did not move, because she had learned in 9 weeks exactly how to stand still and wait for it to be over. And the Queen Consort, who had only to lift one ringed hand, and the hall would have gone silent inside a second, and her daughter would have shut that book, and the whole of what came after would never have happened. The Queen Consort laughed too. I had my pen on the page. My duty was to write the name of the reciter and the title of the piece. I never wrote it, because at that moment, 4 paces behind my left shoulder, a voice came out of the wall. "Put it down." I have heard that voice described 100 times since. They say he roared. They say he thundered. There is a song about it in the shire towns now, and in the song he thunders. He did not thunder. He said it quietly, in the flat, level, absolutely unhurried voice of a man reporting a fire, and it went through that hall like a crack through ice. Because the one thing 300 people in the mirror hall of Harrowgate knew in their bones was that the wall does not speak. Everything stopped. Verena's mouth was open, the book was in her hands. And Guardsman Ivo Rennick of the 3rd Company Household Foot came off the ivory door 3 steps, no more. He did not leave the wall, he simply left the post asterisk, which is the same thing and worse, and stood at the edge of the light with his rifle at his shoulder and his eyes, for the first time in 11 years on duty, on a living face. "That book is not yours, my lady," he said. "Put it down." Nobody moved. 300 people, and the loudest thing in that hall was the candle frame guttering. Verena did the only thing she had ever needed to do in her life, which was to laugh. "Good heavens, asterisk," she said to the room brilliantly gathering them. "The furniture's got opinions. Put it down." And she stopped laughing, because it had not worked, and I do not think anything had ever failed to work for Lady Verena before. Then Morwenna stood up. She rose out of the chair beside the king's with her wine still in her hand, and every eye in the hall went to her, and she was, I will give her this, perfectly, glitteringly calm. "Guardsmen," she said, "you will return to your post, you will not speak again in my presence. And in the morning your captain will explain to you, at some length, what you have thrown away." That was the moment. That, and not the shout and not the 3 steps, is the moment the whole realm turns on, and I wrote every word of it, and the writing of it is the only thing I have ever done in that office that I am proud of. Because Ivo Rennick did not go back to the door. He turned his head slowly, all the way, the great black bearskin coming round like a gun in a turret, and he looked at the Queen Consort of Eldermoor, and he said, "Ma'am, you were standing in the long gallery on Founder's Eve. You were standing in the door of this hall when her candle wouldn't light. You have been in the room, ma'am, every single time. You are the only person under this roof who could have stopped any of it with a word, and you have never once said the word, and you are not going to say it tonight either." The wine glass in Morwenna's hand did not tremble. I watched it. It did not. "You have watched a 9-year-old child taught to be ashamed of her own voice," he said, "for 11 weeks in your own house by your own daughter, and I have stood at that door and watched you watch it." He shifted the rifle an inch on his shoulder. It was the only thing about him that moved. "I am a wall, ma'am," he said. "I know it. My father was a wall for 26 years, and I have been one for 11, and I have taken every insult a man can take at that post and never opened my mouth once, and I would take 1,000 more. But a wall stands there to keep a thing out, and there is nothing in this hall tonight to keep out, ma'am, except us." He drew a breath. It was the only unsteady thing he did all night. "So I cannot stay silent," he said. "Not for this, not for her. If that is my tunic, take my tunic." And then he looked past Morwenna, past the consort, past the treasurer, past all of it to the king. "Sir," said Guardsman Ivo Rennick, "your granddaughter has been asking permission to speak in this house for 2 months. Nobody has given it to her. I am giving her mine." And he put the rifle down. Not thrown, not dropped. He grounded it but to the floor, the way it is done at a funeral, and he stood there in the middle of the mirror hall of Harrowgate with his hands empty at his sides, a guardsman without his arm, which in the household foot is the plainest way a man has of saying, "I have finished. Do what you like with me." There is a great deal of nonsense talked now about what happened next, that the hall cheered, that the king wept on the spot. None of that is true. I was there and I was writing. What happened next was that nothing happened for 8 seconds, and I counted them. And then a small clear voice from the children's end of the hall said, "It's true." Malin had come forward perhaps 4 steps. Her hands were still at her sides. She was looking straight ahead, at nobody, the way you look when you have decided to say a thing and are terrified of the faces. "It's true," she said again. The catch came and she stopped, and she counted. I saw her lips move, asterisk 1, 2, 3, 4, and then she got it out clean, the way her mother taught her, the way she had practiced alone in a corridor 30 times an afternoon for 2 months. May I have leave to speak? Nobody in that hall ever forgot it. Nobody in that hall has ever been allowed to forget it, and I have made quite certain of that because I wrote it down. King Alaric got out of his chair. He was 71 years old and he had a bad hip, and he had not stood up quickly for anything in 4 years, and he came out of that chair like a man coming out of deep water. He looked at the guardsman. He looked at his wife. He looked at the green book in his stepdaughter's hands. He looked at his granddaughter, standing 4 steps out from the wall. "Child," he said, and his voice was not steady at all, "in this house you have never needed leave." But he said it too late, and he knew it, and I could see that he knew it, and I think that knowledge did more damage to that old man in one night than 11 years of Morwenna had managed. Now, if this were a song, and there is a song, that would be the end of it. The wall speaks, the king rises, the wicked are cast down, and everybody goes home. It is barely the middle, because a great house does not turn in a night. It turns like a ship, and while it is turning, everything that is loose on the deck comes down on whoever is standing under it. At 7 the next morning, guardsman Ivo Rennick was arrested at the door of his barrack room by his own sergeant, who apologized while doing it and was charged under Article 9, breaking silence upon post, leaving post, addressing the consort unbidden, addressing the sovereign unbidden, grounding arms without command. 5 counts. Any one of them carries dismissal. He was confined to the armory, his tunic taken pending the table of conduct, and his name suspended from the roll of the 3rd Company. Captain Bevan Marsh signed the charge sheet himself. He had to. There was no other hand it could go through, and I watched what it cost him. Marsh had served under Rennick's father. He signed it, and then he sat with his palms flat on the table for a long moment, and then he said to nobody, well, he knew what he was doing, which is the most that a man in that uniform is permitted to say about anything. And at 9, in the small council room, the Queen Consort of Eldermoor gave the household its story. I was there because a council is a state room. I wrote it down. She was grave, she was gentle. She was, and I could not have believed this if I had not seen it, sorry asterisk. And she did it so well that half that table went home, believing they had watched a woman put her own house in order at cost to herself. My daughter, Morwenna said, behaved last night with a thoughtlessness that shames me. She is young and she is silly, and she meant it as a game. I have spoken to her very severely. She will apologize to the princess publicly at the quarter reading, and she will return the book. Around the table the heads went down and up, a house being reassured. As for the guardsman, she said, and here she let a little sigh into it, I feel for him. I am not a monster, whatever the corridors may be saying this morning, but consider what he has actually done. He turned a child's dinner into a public scandal that will be in every shire paper by Thursday. He addressed the king uninvited in front of 300 people. He decided, alone, with a loaded rifle on his shoulder, that he understood a royal household better than the household did, and he acted on it. She spread her hands. Gentlemen, that is not devotion. And a household guarded by men who decide for themselves which orders are worth keeping is a household guarded by nobody at all. That is the speech that nearly worked, and it was the best thing she ever did, and if she had stopped there she might have one. Because it was not a lie, that is what made it deadly. Every fact in it was true. He had asterisk left post. He had asterisk spoken to the king unbidden. And there is not a soldier in Eldermoor who does not know, in his bones, that an army in which men decide for themselves is not an army. She wrapped a true thing around a wrong thing and served it, and the small council thanked her for her candor, and I wrote down every word. The false dawn lasted 5 days. Verena made her apology at the quarter reading. It took 40 seconds. She stood up in front of the assembled household in a very plain gray dress with her eyes properly lowered, and said that she had been thoughtless and unkind, that she had never meant to wound, and that she begged the princess's pardon. And she gave back the book, holding it out with both hands like a girl in a painting, and Malin took it, and the household applauded, and several ladies were seen to dab their eyes, and everyone agreed that Lady Verena had shown a fine spirit really, in owning up so handsomely. The book was empty. Not torn, not burned. Verena would never have done anything so vulgar as burn a book. Every page of it had been cut out, close to the stitching, with a small sharp pair of scissors, and the green cloth cover put back on the empty block, and the whole thing tied up with a ribbon. A year of a child's work, 200 pages of birds, every letter to her mother. Malin discovered it that night, alone in the nursery corridor, and she did not tell one single person. I only know because Bet Corliss, the housemaid, found the cover in the fire basket in the morning, with the ribbon still on it, and brought it to me white-faced. And by then, the household had spent 4 days telling one another how well it had all been settled. And that is not the worst thing, I wish it were. The worst thing happened in the schoolroom court on the 6th of November, and nobody wrote it down, and I have it only from Malin herself, months later, and from Lord Piers Thane, who was 14 and who came forward on his own and gave his account and cried through the whole of it. Verena told her, in that warm, confiding voice, as one friend telling another a sad piece of news, that the tall guard from the ivory door had been arrested, that he had been stripped of his tunic and his father's regiment, and his pension and his name, and would be turned out of the palace into the street with nothing. And then she said, "And it's because of you, Mouse. He was only doing his job and he'd have been all right forever, and then he opened his mouth about you asterisk. That's what a friend costs. Do you see now? That's what happens to people who stand next to you." And Princess Malin of Eldermoor, who was 9 years old, and who had taken every single thing that autumn had thrown at her without crying in front of anybody once since the 16th of September, went up to the nursery and got into bed and stopped speaking entirely to anyone for 9 days. Princess Adela came back from the Eastern Shires on the 4th of November and heard about the Rose Ball from her coachman before she had got her gloves off, which tells you how fast a thing travels in that palace when nobody official will say it. Adela is the king's younger sister. She is 63, she has broken her collarbone twice hunting, she runs 4 hospitals and a school, and she has never in her life said a sentence with a curve in it. She went straight up to the nursery, without changing, without announcing herself, and she found her great-niece sitting on the floor of the window seat with an empty green cover in her lap and 9 days of silence in her. Adela did not ask her what was wrong. She did not coax her, or tell her to buck up, or ask her to explain herself to a room of adults, and I have come to think this is the single wisest thing anybody did in the whole business. She sat down on the floor beside her, 63 years old in her traveling coat, on the boards, and she said, "I have been told some of it. I am going to tell you 3 things, and then I am going to be quiet, and you needn't say anything at all. 1, not one part of this is your doing. Not one. Not the guardsman, not the book, not the laughing. People who are cruel always tell the person they are being cruel to that it is her fault, because it is the only way to make her keep quiet about it, and it works, and it is a lie, and it is the oldest lie there is. 2, you are believed. Not we shall look into it, believed, by me now entirely before you have said a word. 3, the guardsman is alive and in the armory and eating his dinner, and he has not lost anything yet, and I am going to see about that, and it is my business and not yours, and you are not to carry it. You are 9. You are allowed to put things down." And then she was quiet, exactly as she had promised, for about a quarter of an hour, and after a quarter of an hour Malin leaned very slowly sideways until her head was against her great-aunt's arm, and stayed there, and that was the 9th day, and that evening at supper she asked for the salt. That is all. She asked for the salt. Bet Corliss passed it to her and then went out into the passage and had to hold onto the wall. Adela came to me that same night, to my little room off the long gallery, at 11 o'clock, and she shut the door and sat down on my one hard chair and said, without any preliminary at all, "They will break that guardsman, you know that." "Yes, ma'am." The table of conduct sits on the 15th. 5 counts, all of them true, all admitted. My brother presides, and my brother is a just man and a tired one, and Article 9 is Article 9. Unless somebody puts something in front of him that he cannot get round, he will do his duty and dismiss that man and be sick about it for the rest of his life. She looked at me. The consort will testify that the household has already dealt with the matter, apology given, book returned, all mended. And every fact she gives will be asterisk true, and she will be believed, because there is no evidence of anything else. Is there? No, ma'am. There are no marks on that child, Adela said. There is no letter, there is no order, there is nothing written down anywhere in this palace that shows one grown woman doing one wrong thing. She leaned forward. Nobody did asterisk anything, Mistress Wren. That is the entire, perfect, beautiful trouble, and she built it that way. And I sat there with my inkstand and my 19 years, and I heard my own voice say, "Ma'am, that is not quite true." Adela waited. "Nothing was done," I said, "but a great deal was asterisk said asterisk. And I wrote down all of it. Here is what the diary of the household is in law, and I had to have it explained to me by the king's own clerk of records, because in 19 years of keeping it, I had never once troubled to look it up. It is not a private journal. It is an instrument of the household, kept under warrant, and it has been admissible for 200 years before any court, board, or table sitting under the king's warrant, including the table of conduct of the household foot. And every Friday the fair copy of the week's sheets goes up in a red leather sleeve to the consort's rooms, where she reads it and signs the bottom of the last sheet with her own hand, thereby attesting, "This is the exact wording of the warrant," and I copied it out that night with my hands shaking so badly I had to do it twice, that the record of the week is a true and complete account of the words spoken in the state rooms of the house in her presence. She had signed 11 of them, 11 weeks, 11 red sleeves, 11 times asterisk more when a R with the wide loop on the R. And the record said, in my careful brown hand, in the right-hand column, 41 separate times across those 11 weeks. Her Majesty made no reply. 41. I counted them that night, on the floor of the record room, with a candle, and when I got to the end, I sat down against the shelves and put my hands over my face. Because you cannot bring a woman before a table and say she was unkind asterisk. You cannot say she smiled. You cannot say she found it convenient. There is no charge for a shrug. But you can put in front of the King of Eldermoor 11 sheets of paper, signed by his wife, attesting under warrant that on 41 separate occasions, in his own state rooms, in her own hearing, a child asked for her book back, and a child was called asterisk mouse asterisk, and a child was told she could not manage fire, and a child asked asterisk, "Am I allowed to be here?" And the Queen Consort of Eldermoor made no reply. That is not an opinion or an interpretation or a clerk's meddling. That is her own signature, 41 times on her own silence. She had told me herself in her own closet with her pen in her hand. If I made no reply, then no reply was made, and it is your business to write it and nothing else. I had done exactly as I was told. For 19 years I had done exactly as I was told, and it had made me the most useful witness in the kingdom. The table of conduct sat on the 15th of November in the Armory Hall, under the king's warrant, which hangs on the wall in a black frame with a red seal the size of a saucer. It is not a grand room. The Armory Hall is long and cold and whitewashed, with a stone floor and racks along the walls, and it smells of oil and metal, and it has a plain oak table across one end and one chair in the middle of the floor for the man being tried. No guilt, no throne. Soldiers built it and soldiers use it. King Alaric presided, because a charge involving the sovereign's person must go to the sovereign. Princess Adela sat at his right hand as assessor, her ancient right as a princess of the blood, which she had not exercised in 19 years and exercised now with an expression like a closing door. Captain Bevan Marsh sat at the left as the officer of the company, with the charge sheet in front of him in his own writing. The judge advocate, a dry little man named Corbel, sat at the end. And in the chair in the middle of the floor, in shirt sleeves, a guardsman under charge does not wear the tunic. That is the entire point, and it is the cruelest small thing the regiment does, sat Ivo Rennick. He looks smaller without it, every man does, that is what it is for. The court was open, because Adela insisted on it, over the objection of the judge advocate and the fury of the consort, and so behind the rail stood 200 people. The household, the third company off duty and standing at ease along the back wall with their bearskins under their arms, the shire papers, Aldous Fenn, Lord Piers Thane and his father, Bet Corliss in her apron, and the children's physician with his hat in his hands. Princess Malin was not there. Adela had forbidden it flatly, to the king's face. She will not be brought into that room to perform her own unhappiness for 200 people so that they can weigh it, she said. If this house cannot find the truth without putting a 9-year-old in a witness chair, then this house does not deserve to find it. Her evidence will be taken by me, in the nursery, in writing, with her physician present and read to the table. Nobody argued. There are perhaps 3 people in the kingdom of Eldermoor who can speak to King Alaric like that, and 2 of them are dead. The charges were read. Rennick pleaded guilty to all 5, immediately in a voice you could hear in the street. Guilty, sir, all of it. I did every one of those things, and I would do them again this afternoon. Corbel, the judge advocate, put down his pen and looked at the ceiling and said, "Man, you are not helping yourself." "No, sir," Rennick agreed. And the Queen Consort of Eldermoor rose from the front of the rail, in dark green with her rings on, to give her evidence in mitigation, which is to say, to bury him, and she did it very well indeed. She was sorrowful, she was reasonable. She did not attack him once, and that was the cleverest part of it, she praised him. "He is plainly a good man," she said, "and I want the table to hear me say it. He acted out of feeling, but this house cannot be governed by feeling, sirs." There was an unkindness among the young people. It was real, and it shames my own daughter, who has apologized for it publicly. But it was dealt with within the family, as such things are, and the child was made whole. She turned her head a little towards the rail, so that they all had her profile. And on the night before it was dealt with, this man decided that his own judgment stood above the standing orders of the regiment that raised him. I am not asking for severity. I am asking for the law. Article 9 exists so that men in that uniform never have to decide. Take that away and you have not got a household guard. You have got 200 armed men with opinions. And she sat down, and I watched the room, and I will not lie to you, the room went with her. The shire papers were writing. Corbel was nodding slowly, because it was, as a matter of law, entirely correct. Captain Marsh had his eyes on the table, and the king had his hand over his mouth, the way he does, and his eyes on Ivo Rennick in his shirt-sleeves in the chair, and I could see the whole weight of the thing coming down on him and no way out from under it. Adela said, into the silence, "The table calls the clerk of the diary." I have written in that palace for 19 years, and I had never once spoken in a state room. The clerk does not speak. It is nearly the same rule as his. We are both furniture. He stands and I write, and the room goes on around us, and not one man in it ever asked me what I thought, and I had never wanted them to. I stood up with the fair copies in my arms in 11 red sleeves, and I found that my knees would not do what they were told, and Bet Corliss, God bless her, put a hand in the small of my back and pushed. I set the sleeves on the table, Corbel administered the oath, and Adela said, "Mistress Wren, the table has heard that this matter was an unkindness among children, and that it was dealt with. You keep the record of what is spoken in the state rooms of this house. Tell the table what is in the record." And I said, and I could hear my own voice a long way off, like somebody talking in the next room, "Ma'am, the record is not of what was done, it is of what was said. It has 2 columns. In the left I write what was spoken. In the right I write what was answered." I put my hand on the top sleeve. "May I read the right-hand column, ma'am?" "Read it." So I read it. I read the 29th of September, when Her Highness Princess Malin asked, in the long gallery, in the hearing of the Queen Consort, for the return of her notebook. Her Majesty made no reply. I read the 2nd of October, when Her Highness asked a second time of the steward, at the consort's own writing table. Her Majesty made no reply. I read the 11th in the Mirror Hall, when the princess's taper would not light and Lady Verena said, before the household, "You can't even manage fire." Her Majesty was in the doorway. Her Majesty made no reply. I read the 17th, the 19th, the 22nd. I read the Lantern Court's rules as they were spoken aloud in the schoolroom court, which is a state room because the king's warrant hangs in it. A piece of luck I will thank God for until I die. That the secretary must ask leave aloud, in a full sentence, and might not begin again if she stumbled. Her Majesty was present. Her Majesty made no reply. I read Founder's Eve, not with that mouse, and the 4 words. I read the Rose Ball. I read out, in that cold whitewashed room, the words that Lady Verena had read aloud from a 9-year-old's private letter to her mother. "Please do not tell Papa, because then they will say I am a telltale, and then I will have nobody at all." And I read what the record showed had been answered by the Queen Consort of the realm, who was standing 11 feet away. Her Majesty made no reply. Somewhere behind me, a woman was crying. The 3rd company along the back wall had come, without any order at all, off at ease and onto attention, and stayed there, and nobody rebuked them for it. "How many times," said Princess Adela, "does that phrase appear in your record this season, Mistress Wren?" 41, ma'am." "Say it again." 41 times, ma'am." "In 11 weeks." And Morwenna said, from the rail, and it was the first mistake she made in 11 years. And she made it because she had never once in her life been contradicted by a clerk. A clerk's shorthand, a convention, it means nothing. It means only that I was not obliged to answer a child in every room I walked through. "Yes, ma'am," I said, "that is what I always thought it meant too." And then I turned over the last sheet of the sleeve, and I held it up so that the table could see the bottom of it, and I said, "But by the warrant of this house, ma'am, a fair copy of the record is carried up to you every Friday, and you read it, and you sign it. And the words above your signature are these, that the record of the week is a true and complete account of the words spoken in the state rooms of the house in her presence." I laid the sheet down in front of the king. "That is your Majesty's wife's own hand," I said. 11 of them. Every Friday of this season she read the column and she signed it true. The armory hall was very quiet. King Alaric picked up the sheet. He looked at it for a long, long time. Corbel began to shift, and then he set it down and picked up the next, and the next, going through the 11 of them one at a time, and nobody in that hall said one word, and the only sound in the armory hall of Harrowgate was an old man turning over paper. He got to the last one. "Morwenna R. the wide loop on the R." "You read these," he said. He did not look up. "Every week you read them and you signed them." "Alaric, you signed 41 times," the king said, "that you were in the room." And he put his hand flat on the 11 sheets, and I saw his fingers pressing on the paper until the ends of them went white. And he said, in a voice I have never heard from him before or since. So did I. Nobody breathed. That is the sting of it, madam, Alaric said. Do you imagine I have not worked it out? I was in the doorway of the Mirror Hall on the 11th. I was at that table on Founder's Eve. I was in my chair at the Rose Ball with my head turned to a man talking about asterisk grain asterisk, and I heard 300 people laugh, and I smiled at it because it was easier to assume that a pleasant sound in my own house was a pleasant thing. His jaw worked. There is a column in that book for me too, is there not, Mistress Wren? Yes, sir, I said, there is. And what does it say? I did not have to look. It says His Majesty made no reply asterisk, sir, I said, 9 times. The King of Eldermoor closed his eyes. And Guardsman Ivo Rennick in the chair in the middle of the floor in his shirt sleeves, with 5 guilty pleas against his name and nothing at all left to lose, said quietly, Sir, with respect. That's why I spoke. They took Lady Verena's evidence after that, and it did not go the way she expected, because the room had turned and she could not feel it turn. She was still charming. She still tilted her head. She said again that it had been a game, that she had a wretched sense of humor, that she had apologized and returned the book. And Adela let her finish, right to the end, and then reached under the table and put a green cloth cover on the oak with a ribbon still tied round it and said, Open it. Verena did not move. Open it, my lady. She opened it. 200 people watched a 19-year-old woman open an empty book, the cut stubs of 200 pages standing along the stitching like teeth. A year of that child's work, Adela said. Cut out with scissors, every bird, every letter to her mother, and handed back in front of the household with a ribbon on it so that we would all applaud you for your fine spirit and so that she would open it alone at night and understand that the apology was part of the joke. Adela's voice never rose once. You did not do that in a temper, my lady. You sat down and you did it carefully. And then Lord Piers Thane, 14 years old, in a coat he had outgrown, put up his hand at the rail and asked, in a cracking voice, if he might say what Lady Verena had told the princess in the schoolroom court on the 6th of November. And he told them, about the guardsman, about that's what a friend costs. He got about half of it out before he was crying too hard to go on, and his father put a hand on the back of his neck and held him, and Captain Marsh, who had not moved a muscle in an hour, got up and walked round the table and poured the boy a glass of water himself. Verena had gone the color of wax. And Adela read, last of all in a flat, quiet voice, the evidence of the Princess Malin, taken in the nursery in writing with her physician present, as the table had directed. It was 4 lines long. I was not hurt. Nobody hit me. I want to say that because I think people will ask. It was the waiting that was the bad part. They waited on purpose so I would get stuck. The guard is not in trouble because of me. He is in trouble because he was the only one who said anything. And Aunt Adela says that is the opposite of being in trouble, and I am trying to believe her. Please give him his coat back. King Alaric gave judgment at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 15th of November, standing, with his hand on the back of his chair, in a room that had not made a sound in 20 minutes. He dealt with the guardsman first. Guardsman Ivo Rennick, he said, you have pleaded guilty to 5 counts under Article 9 and you are guilty of all 5 and this table finds accordingly. You left your post. You broke silence. You addressed my wife unbidden. You addressed me unbidden. You grounded your arm without command. He paused. Every one of those things is a grave offense in a household guard, and if I pretended otherwise, I would be doing your regiment an injury it would take 50 years to mend. Rennick in the chair said, No, sir. Then hear the rest, said the king. He turned the charge sheet face down on the table. Article 9 has stood for 400 years, and it is a good article, and I am not going to break it for one man on one bad night. but I have sat in this room for 4 hours, and I have understood something that I ought to have understood when I was 30, and it is this." He lifted his head. "That article was written to keep a guardsman from quarreling. It was never written to keep him from rescuing. And in 400 years, nobody troubled to say so out loud, because nobody imagined a house in which the thing needing rescue would be a child of the king's own blood, and the person she needed rescuing from would be sitting at his right hand. He said, "Therefore, by the warrant of this house, I direct that the standing orders of the household foot be amended this day, and that there be added to Article 9 a clause, which shall be read to every recruit of the household foot on the day he takes the uniform, and which reads as follows: A guardsman of this house may break silence, leave post, and speak plainly, and shall be held blameless in it, where he does so to prevent harm to a child of this house, and cruelty is harm, whether or not a hand is laid on. His silence is the honor of the house, but the house is not honored by silence when a child is in need of a voice. It will be numbered 9B, the king said, and it will be known in this regiment for as long as this regiment exists as the Rennick clause, because I will not have him remembered as the man who broke Article 9. I will have him remembered as the man who finished writing it." The third company came off attention along the back wall of the armory hall and made a sound that was not a cheer and was not permitted, and that no officer in that room ever afterwards claimed to have heard. "Charges dismissed," said King Alaric. "All 5, Captain Marsh, give the man his coat." Bevan Marsh had the tunic on the table in front of him. He had had it there, folded, brushed, the brass done, since 8 o'clock that morning, which tells you everything about Bevan Marsh that you will ever need to know. He carried it round the table himself and put it into Ivo Rennick's hands, and then, in front of the king and the table and 200 people, Captain Bevan Marsh of the 3rd Company saluted a guardsman. Then the king dealt with his own house, and that was harder and it took longer, and he did not enjoy 1 second of it. Lady Verena, Morwenna's daughter, was removed from the court of Harrowgate. Not exiled, not disgraced with a public whipping of words. The king is not a cruel man, and Adela, who is the least sentimental person I have ever met, was very firm that a 19-year-old destroyed for sport makes no one safer. She was stripped of her rank and privileges at court, of every appointment in the household, and of the right of entry to any royal residence for 3 years. She was sent to the Ivory Bridge Hospice, Adela's own foundation, where they take in the old and the failing to work in an apron, under a matron who does not care in the smallest degree whose daughter anybody is, for a year certain. Her allowance was cut to a working wage. She was forbidden to be in a room with Princess Maelin, ever, unless the child herself should one day ask for it, and the king made a point of saying that last part out loud twice. The choice is hers, not yours and not mine. And the empty green book was put into her hands, and she was told what her restitution would be, and it broke her where nothing else had. She could not give it back. That is the point of a year of a child's work. It is gone, and no power on earth, not the king's, can put 200 pages of a 9-year-old's birds back into the world. So the household did it instead. It was Bet Corliss's idea, and I will go to my grave saying so, though the Shire papers gave the credit to the king. Every soul in the Palace of Harrowgate who had ever seen that green book carried about under that small arm, and it turned out to be nearly all of them. It turned out that half the palace had been quietly watching that child not have a friend for 2 months and had not known what on earth to do about it, was invited to make 1 page. They had 6 weeks, and the birds from Maelin's own list, which Adela got out of her gently over 3 afternoons, because she remembered every one. The master of the kitchens drew a heron. It is a very bad heron. It is famously bad. It is on page 40 and Maelin will not have it moved. Captain Bevan Marsh, who cannot draw and did not pretend to, wrote out instead in a clerkly hand, The flight times of the geese over the fenwater as recorded by the sentries of the 3rd Company at the river posts, every autumn, going back 31 years. It is 4 pages. It is the most beautiful thing in the entire volume, and he has never once admitted that he sat up 3 nights to copy it. Bet Corliss did a Wren and signed it, and I have never been so proud of anything in my life. 211 pages came in. Guardsman Rennick's is page 1, and it is a marsh harrier low, with the wings held in a V, and it is not at all bad, and under it he wrote, because he had been given permission by the King of Eldermoor to write whatever he liked, which is how you know it from a hen harrier. You taught me that through a door. They bound it in green cloth and they gave it to her at the winter table, and she opened it, and she looked at it for a very long time, and then she got down off her chair and went the whole length of that room and put her arms round Bet Corliss the housemaid in front of the entire household, because she is 9, and because 9-year-olds know exactly who did the work. Crown Prince Rowan and Princess Ilara came home from the Northern Progress on the 20th of November, having abandoned the last week of it, having ridden through 2 nights, having heard the whole thing from a shire paper bought at a station by an equerry who then had to decide whether to hand it over. I was not present at what happened in the nursery, and no clerk was, and there is no record of it anywhere, and there never will be. But I was present the next morning in the small council room, when Crown Prince Rowan, who is the mildest man in Eldermoor, who has never raised his voice in a council in his life, laid down before his father a single sheet of paper, which was my letter, and the physician's letter and Bet Corliss's letter, all 3 of them unopened, found in a drawer of a writing desk in the Queen Consort's closet. 3 women wrote to warn that house about that child. All 3 letters went into the same drawer. That was the end of Morwenna's real power in the Palace of Harrowgate, and it did not come with a shout. She keeps her title. She is the Queen Consort, and she is the King's wife, and there is no law in Eldermoor that unmakes either of those things, and the shire papers may say what they like about it. But she was stripped, that morning, of the wardship of the royal children, which passed to Princess Adela, and of her seat on the household council, and of the counter-signature of the diary of the household, which went back to the Lord Chamberlain where it had been for 200 years before she took it. And King Alaric made one further order, which was his own idea, and which I think was the closest that weary, decent, terribly late old man could come to punishing himself. The diary of the household is now read aloud. Once a quarter in the mirror hall before the assembled household, the clerk of the diary reads out the right-hand column of the preceding season, every reply given, and every reply asterisk not given, by whoever did not give it by name, out loud in front of everybody. His Majesty made no reply. He has to sit and hear it. He insisted on it. He said, and I wrote this down, and it is the last thing in my long service that I have ever been glad to write. A man will bear almost anything rather than be told out loud in front of his own house that he was in the room. Let us all be told. Let us be told 4 times a year until this house is sick of the sound of it. I am not the clerk of the diary any more. I am the keeper of the record, a new office, and a better one with 3 clerks under me, and the right to speak in a state room without being asked, which no clerk in the history of Eldermoor has ever had, and which I have used exactly twice in 4 years, both times to say, "Ma'am, I think the child is trying to say something." Ivo Rennick is a sergeant now. He would not take the commission they offered him. He said, in front of the king, that he had been a wall for 11 years and had got rather good at it, and would like to go on being one, if it was all the same, and Alaric laughed for the first time in a season, and let him have his way. He is at the ivory door most afternoons, 4 to 6, on a standing post, because he asked for it, and nobody in that regiment would refuse him anything now. And every afternoon at 4:10, Princess Malin of Eldermoor, who is 13 now, and who is taller than her grey-tan, and who reads the grace at the winter table every year without once counting under her breath, and who has published, with her own name on the spine, a small book about the birds of the fenwater that has sold 11,000 copies in the Shire towns, comes down the long gallery on her way to the schoolroom court. And understanding Order 9b, which is on the wall of every barrack room in the household foot, a guardsman of that house may speak, and be held blameless, where he speaks to a child of that house who has need of a voice. The regiment argued about that for about a week. Then somebody senior, and I have my suspicions about who, ruled that the clause plainly permits a daily good morning, on the grounds that a person who is never spoken to is a person who has need of a voice, and that has been the law of the ivory door ever since. So he says it, once every afternoon, eyes forward, rifle at the shoulder, in that flat, quiet voice that once stopped 300 people dead in the Mirror Hall. "Good afternoon, Your Highness." "Good afternoon, Sergeant Rennick," she says. And she goes on down the gallery, past my desk, past the portraits of her dead, through the ivory door, and I put it in the left-hand column, every single day in brown ink, because it is a thing that was spoken in a state-room of this house, and it is my office to record it. And every single day I fill in the right. Her Highness answered, 4 words. I have written them 1,462 times. I will write them until my hand gives out. They are the only 4 words in that book I have ever loved.